The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I know a few of you are just coming in, and don't worry, we did start at 2:01, so if you couldn't hear anything prior to 2:01, that's okay. That was intentional. In GoTo webinar, you don't hear anything till the broadcast starts. So welcome to Best Practices for Using a Learning Management System. I'm so excited you're here, and as the remaining people are entering in, I'm just going to talk about a few housekeeping things and introductory things. Welcome to another PD Network webinar this afternoon. This one's titled Best Practices for Using a Learning Management System. This session is aimed at adult educators whose programs have a learning management system available to them. Maybe it's currently being used for remote learning during this time, or maybe you're looking towards the future when programs may begin offering more distance learning opportunities. If your program does not have a learning management system, we are going to mention a couple of free options that an individual could choose. However, next month in June, we are going to be offering a webinar for teachers not currently using a learning management system and some options for them if they kind of wanted to simulate one or use some tools for their distance learning classroom. So whichever the category describes you is perfectly fine, but there will definitely be information for everyone to take away from this. So if you don't currently have a learning management system, that's okay. These are best practices. So this is not a tutorial on how to use a specific learning management system, but rather best practices for while you're in one. So I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Amber Fornaciari, and my colleague Anita is on with me today. And we're going to kind of split this right down the middle. So you're going to hear from Anita a little bit later on. We're both in place for the Illinois Professional Development Network, and we're so glad that you are here today. We've got over 100 people on already, and we're so excited to have you. Before anybody asks in the question box, this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on the Excellence in Adult Ed website later this week, along with a copy of the slideshow. So if you want the slides, you will have access to them. We try to send them when we send certificates, but it doesn't always happen that way. It is definitely always on the Excellence in Adult Ed website, which is the website connected to the email that you registered at. So a few other housekeeping notes. All attendees are muted. Like I said, we have over 100 people, approaching 150 on this webinar today, so that would be a lot of people trying to talk at once. Please, if you have a question, put it in the question box. If you don't have a question box, then it might say chat box. So either one that you have available to you would be fine. But if you have a very specific question, that's where we're going to be answering questions. We do have a pretty packed webinar, so we'll do our best to get to questions, but if there's burning questions after, we may address them through email. Also, if you're having audio or tech issues, please exit the platform and use the link to re-enter. That is your go-to troubleshooting tip for today. And as a last resort, you can always use the call-in information, and that is in your original email invite. It's also in the chat box. So if you need that for some reason, it is in the chat box. All right, this has been our token picture throughout our distance learning series of webinars here. We are here to support you. This PDN network, we are the hand holding up the tree being all you individual instructors and administrators and testing staff and support staff, everybody out there. And we want to keep you apprised of all the upcoming distance learning opportunities. The way that you find out about those is there's a couple different ways. You can always visit our website. I've already mentioned it once, and you'll hear it again later throughout this whole webinar today, excellenceinadulted.com. We also have some excellent resources there just for adult ed instructors. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and now even on Twitter. And you can also sign up on the listserv to get our emails, which come out about once a week. So we try not to flood your email, maybe 2 a week. but to let you know about the events that are going on in our adult ed world. So we are here to support you. Let's start getting into the topic today. First things first, right? This concept of distance learning is new territory for most of us. Illinois Adult Ed hasn't had a formal distance learning policy before. So in this webinar, we're going to discuss some best practices that adult ed instructors need to consider as we all kind of begin to formulate learning classes at our programs. We wanted to keep in mind the premise of andragogy, which is our defining principles and how they relate to online learning. So we hope that you see those principles throughout our presentation today. If you haven't done online instruction before, what do you need to be sure gets included that would normally happen in a face-to-face session? Some of the most successful face-to-face sessions are because of the community that's created in classrooms. And that can be hard to do online. So we hope we're going to offer you a few ideas to helping create community, but also helping get content across today. We're going to be using an acronym, LMS. Going forward, if you hear LMS, it's referring to a learning management system. So we don't want anybody to be confused or feel like they're being left out. Learning management system is a common tech term for what the kinds of systems we're going to talk about today, or platforms or programs if you think of them. So what's on our agenda today? This session will focus on these 4 categories within the context of a learning management system. So we're going to talk about facilitating discussion boards, increasing student engagement, assessing for progress, and providing feedback. All of these things, we hope that this is what brought you here today, but we do have a little interaction here for you. We're going to launch a poll. Let me get that set up. We want to know, what are you most excited about, or what did you read the description, what was it that made you want to attend in the description? So you should see a little box on your screen that says a poll. I can see that about 20% of you have voted. So get in here and vote. What exactly brought you into this webinar today? All right, half of you have voted. That's pretty impressive. 75 in less than 10 seconds. Nice job. You guys are really engaged participants already. All right, I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. Get your vote in for the poll. All right, I'm going to close that poll and share it for you. You should be able to see the results just like I am right now. And you can see that an overwhelming number of people want to know, what do you got to increase student engagement? I feel like this isn't just in an online environment, right? We have we probably have these challenges in our face-to-face classrooms too, but it's just a different approach, right? I appreciate those of you. No one wants to know anything about providing feedback. So Anita, I don't know, maybe you can go home early today because we don't want to know anything about providing feedback online, but
I'm going to give it to him anyway.
But we will get to student engagement, and I'm so excited to share what we have for you today and what some other people are doing. We have a panelist even on today to talk a little bit about what she's doing in her classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that poll. And so let's talk a little bit more about what an LMS is, right? And most of you might know this. What is an LMS? It's a learning management system. This is an overview presentation. So if you don't know how to use your colleges or your programs or your institution's LMS yet, it is likely that they are putting out those tutorials and classes faster than you can imagine right now. I know at my own program they're doing that. This is not that. This is not, what do I click to get things into my LMS? Because there are so many of them, as you'll see on my next slide here, that we couldn't possibly service the entire state's learning management systems, okay? If you're not sure if you have an LMS at your system, be sure to check with your administrator. If you do have one, like I said, your institution's probably going to be offering lots of training because you're not the only teacher who's going to need it. Many of these learning management systems have free versions available, sometimes with limited capabilities compared to the paid version. And we actually use the free for teachers version of Canvas for our professional development courses. So if you've been through any professional development courses, we also use a version of Moodle, which is up on this list, for our other iLearn courses. If you've ever taken an iLearn course, which is pretty likely for the 150 of you that are on here, you've probably been in either a Moodle or a Canvas course if you've done PD through our professional development network. These are just some of the ones that are listed. So for instance, Blackboard, Brightspace, which is sometimes called D2L, Canvas, Edmodo, Google Classroom, Moodle, Schoology. Those are all versions, and this is not an exhaustive list, but the ones that we know are pretty prevalent within adult ed programs. Remember, maybe you don't have one of these yet, but you want one. Like for instance, you want to know more about Google Classroom. In June, we have another webinar coming to talk a little bit more about what if you don't have an LMS? What are some tools that you can use? And that does not have a scheduled date yet, but it will be coming in June. All right. So let's talk about some common learning management features that you should be utilizing, right? These are things that you can assume most LMS platforms have and you should be making use of. It's important, first of all, to have a welcome page in your learning management system at the beginning of your course with a picture, maybe even a video. You wouldn't walk into your face-to-face class and not introduce yourself, or at least I hope you wouldn't. You wouldn't shield your face as you walked into a face-to-face class. So please don't do that in an online course, right? I know pictures and videos aren't everybody's cup of tea, but something to let them see that there is a human behind this online course can be really helpful and be a great start to your online course. Another feature that I think some people kind of take for granted, but is a great one for an LMS, is the calendar. How many of us have had to switch to some sort of calendar system recently just to keep up with the things that we're being asked to do? In an LMS, almost all of them have some sort of calendar feature. And this can really help you and your students keep track of all the things that are going on within your course. Also, communication tools. Now, this is where some of the LMS platforms start to vary. Some of them have a chat feature. Almost all of them have an email. Almost all of them have discussion boards. Some of them have a web conferencing tool. So some of them have something like Big Blue Button, which is like Zoom, but not. If your institution has a Zoom account or they have a WebEx account, sometimes that's integrated into your LMS. Those are what we call web conferencing systems. So all of those are communication tools, and sometimes you have to choose what kind of content you put where. What do I use the chat for? What am I going to use email for? What am I going to use discussion boards for? And what am I going to use in my web conferencing? Also, there's usually a to-do list or an assignment section. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the calendar, right? You can assign due dates, and when you use the assignment section, your students usually get some sort of list of, hey, you have things that you need to do. And for our students who maybe don't have as much experience navigating a learning management system, this can be really important because it will give alerts to them to say, hey, you're supposed to do this assignment by this date. That's kind of the benefit. That is a real strong benefit of a learning management system, is it's kind of an integrated planner for them if they're logging in, which we all know is a whole other topic, right? Notifications. I can't talk to you enough about notifications, but notifications for yourself as well as for the students. There's a lot of flexibility with the notifications you can receive. Sometimes they're given through an app, sometimes they're given through a text message, sometimes they're given through email. It's important that you know how those notifications are coming to you and how the students know they will be contacted through the learning management system. The last thing that I don't want to call it a hidden secret, but some people don't realize that in most learning management systems, you can restrict access to content within there or hide certain pieces. This can be really beneficial to for you if maybe you've got the first part of the course open, but you're still working on the next part. You don't want students kind of poking their head around into what's coming next yet. You can keep them hidden as to not overwhelm your students. Let them do it one chunk at a time. And so restricting access or hiding modules can also be a really great advantage for your learning management system. So these are kind of the things you really need to know how to use these within your learning management system. Notice that content isn't up here. And because we know that you know your content, we know that you know how to teach. These are the tools that you need in a learning management system and that you should utilize to get that content to your students. One of the biggest success tips I can give you today is to use that calendar function and assign the lessons to help with expectations and monitoring of progress. It will help you and it will help your students as if you're using that calendar function and the assigning lessons piece. The other success tip goes back to those notifications. Show the students how to set up notifications. Now, hopefully, there's some sort of introductory piece to your online course. We don't know what that will look like yet, a lot of us, but even if you have to do it in a synchronous Zoom meeting or a web conference of some sort where you show them where the notifications are and you have them go do it, you could even make it in an assignment. This can be really important for students and yourself so that they are being notified the way that they prefer. Some people might prefer to only be notified through email. Others might really want the text messages. In my LMS that my school uses, you can actually note whether you want text messages or emails for all these individual things that happen within the learning management system. So this is something I show my students and we talk about, do you want to know every time I post every little thing on here? Or do you only want to know if it's an assignment? Or, and letting them choose that, but also making sure that their information is correct. For goodness sake, sometimes we get a wrong phone number, or maybe that's not the phone number they prefer anymore. Maybe they got their own cell phone now. So making sure their contact information is correct and getting those notifications set up can be one really important tip to getting your students online and ready to go from the start. All right, discussion boards. Let's talk about one of those LMS features a little bit more. And let's not ask ourselves, how do I use it, but how do I use it well? I don't know about you, but I have been on many discussion boards that have fallen flat on their face. You don't want that to be your discussion board, right? Here is a sample of a discussion board in the Canvas learning management system. So some of the screenshots we're showing you are actually from completely different LMSs, and that's intentional because we want to show you how they have such common features usually, and they might look a little different. I want you to take a look at this for a second. I'm going to be quiet for a few seconds so you can kind of see what this is, okay? So first of all, you probably see Anita Kerr's name on here, who is my colleague on with me today. This is a discussion board she had set up for actually a PD activity. Take a look at the setup of the discussion board. Do you see what kind of things do you notice? First of all, the discussion board is being graded. That's the very first thing on the top. So students know I need to participate in this in order for it to reflect. It's not optional, right? Are the questions in the discussion prompt clear? Is it a direct question? And what is the most important component? Do the students know what to do? And this could be a very complex question. The first time you do a discussion board, you probably have to do some modeling or some direct instruction on what exactly you need in it. Also notice only one student replied before the teacher jumped in. So what would you do differently? If you want to put that in the chat or the questions, that's fine, or you can just say it out loud to yourself. Maybe say it to your dog who's sitting next to you, or your spouse working from home at the same table. So while I wish we could unmute everybody, we're not going to. So I hope you had a chance to put something in the chat or to say something to your dog, okay? But here we are with discussion boards. What would you do differently? Well, let's first think about what exactly is the discussion board's purpose, right? This is one way we can get to that andragogy piece of creating community in an online setting. It allows people a communication tool to talk to one another. It helps to develop critical thinking and writing skills. It assesses students' knowledge or application of a topic, and it also offers a place to ask questions about the course or specific content. It's important to create an environment around a discussion board where you're not expecting people to be an expert, but rather learn through talking with one another in an online environment. Think about when you're holding a face-to-face class where you never let students have a discussion, no whole group, no small group. You probably can't even imagine a class like that where people aren't talking to each other. It's such an important part of learning. Students need to develop that speaking and listening skills. And in an online class, we don't always have the capability for speaking and listening, but we do have the capability for critical thinking and writing. And writing is a continuation of speaking or a continuation of thought. You would always incorporate a discussion into a face-to-face class. So you need to make sure it's included in an online course. So as we're talking more about discussion boards, sorry, I'm lost my train of thought there. As we're talking about more about discussion boards, let's think about some of those things that maybe you already came up with, and you have them in the chat and you're shouting them at me right now, but decide how much teacher involvement is healthy for the discussion. And I don't want to deter you from participating, because I strongly believe that sometimes the teacher does have to facilitate a little bit of the discussion in order to get it moving. Other times the teacher needs to sit back and let the discussion happen. And so that really might come from practicing, right? And from doing the discussion and seeing how your students respond. Some points about a discussion board here. Use a plant to start a good discussion. And schedule a few live meetings for discussion too. I think that a strong online course does have a combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning. And if we schedule a few live meetings for discussion and you kind of coach your students through what discussion looks like in an academic setting, you can point out how they are to carry that through to a discussion board in an LMS. What's nice about a discussion board in an LMS is that it gives students a chance to think about what they're going to say, because the response is not expected immediately. Often in class, I always have students that if I talk to them maybe 5 minutes after I ask the question, they would have had a really well-formulated answer. But because I asked them on the spot, they got nervous, they didn't know what to say, they lost their train of thought. A discussion board can really take some of those things away and allow a student to think about what they're going to say and form it into a concise communication for their peers to read. If you're noticing that a discussion board is not taking off in your online course, number one, that doesn't mean never do it again. Number two, maybe you do need to do some more discussion in your synchronous learning, in your conferencing calls, in order to promote that discussion and model it and show your students how to participate in an academic discussion board. Also, it's important to set expectations for your students. How many posts do they need to make? Do they need to respond to their peers? And give a grade for participation on the boards. That's one way to help them do them if they know that they're required. The other thing, and if there's like 3 things you take away from this webinar today, this next thing is going to be like one of your major things. Set parameters for posts. And let me show you what 3CQ means. And this is a live link. So when you get the PDF of the slides, remember we're going to put a PDF of the slides and the recorded webinar up on the Excellence site. You can click on this link. Some of the parameters that you can help your student or set for your students is when they respond or to a peer, they can use a compliment, a comment, a connection, or a question. This is where that 3CQ comes from, right? I also would encourage you, especially for our lower level students whose writing and reading skills are not high enough to maybe think of the prompt on their own, give them the sentence frame. Tell them, start with, I like blah that you did in your discussion post, or I disagree with because, I also thought, or I wonder why. We would do that in an ESL, in a reading, in a math classroom. We would do that in the classroom. We would give our students, if they were having trouble thinking of how to articulate themselves, we would give them a support and for what they needed. So there's no reason you shouldn't do that right in a discussion board or online as well. Again, one of the like top 3 things from this webinar today, 3CQ, compliment, comment, connection, question. I'm so using that, by the way. I'm kind of a little sad that I didn't coin it myself. So let's talk about the prompt. This is another example of a discussion board post from a teacher. Notice the first post. It's fine, but it's kind of vague. Notice what it was revised to. How much more detail is provided for students to know what they should post. And also notice the demand from evidence about the article they read, which it aligns to our ABE ASE standards, right? Finding evidence. So using information from the article, write a short plan of action you could put into place to reduce, reuse, or recycle. Be mindful of the logistics of the plan and the true impact it would have on the environment. You know, with the first question, you could very easily get a student that says, I'm going to use my recycling bin, right? But and because there was no further direction given, they might think that's an acceptable answer. With the second version of the prompt, you can see how a short plan implies already that they should have more than a simple sentence as a reply. So just another example of using a good prompt. Remember, students might need help knowing what to say. Consider providing sentence starters or sentence frames. And also remember that the best discussion happens when there's a give and take, when there's discourse or disagreement. Sometimes you have to intentionally prompt that because sometimes people like to just be really fluffy and nice and say things to just agree to get the assignment done. But if you want the learning to happen, the prompt needs to be robust enough to create discourse or disagreement, or even just a difference of opinions for students to be able to respond to it. This next one I'm going to show a little bit in a little bit of detail here. Set guidelines for your discussion. Another clickable link in the PDF that will be available on the Excellence site is a resource I found called 15 Rules of Netiquette. And so this is a clickable link, but I'm going to show it to you a little bit. I know you can't read that. I know you're thinking, Amber, gosh, can you zoom that? Here you go. And I'm not going to show you or go through this whole thing, but this idea of there's an etiquette that you should have for an online discussion board, or this isn't the Twitter feed coming from celebrities, I hope you're laughing at that. That's not what this discussion board is. It's not the Twitter fight between two famous people. This is a discussion board to promote learning. And so whether you give your students a resource like this and you review it with them, or you even have them make it up as a group, maybe that's one of your synchronous lessons, is forming some parameters or expectations around this idea of discussion boards that can also create a lot of involvement and some intrinsic motivation if they were helping with some of these netiquette or these etiquette rules. Things like, before posting your question, check to see if somebody's already asked it. Stay on topic. Don't write anything that sounds angry or sarcastic, even as a joke. This is something that we all are probably struggling with right now as becoming remote workers, right? Is this idea that something you would say in the office doesn't always come across the same way as it would in an email or in a message to a coworker. I like number 3, don't type in all caps. If you do, it will look like you're screaming, right? That's a that's a pretty funny comment, but it's true. If you see something in all caps, it looks like you're very angry about it. Interesting how that graphic representation can show feeling. So sharing something like this with your students can really benefit the expectations for your discussion board and gives you something to go back to if you're noticing some things happening on a discussion board. So here's some other options for discussion. These are some teaching tools. One's called Flipgrid, another is called Padlet. And I have used Padlet. We use Padlet all the time in our office. I've just started experimenting with Flipgrid, and I want to show you, some people have heard about Padlet, but not Flipgrid. I'm going to show you, we don't have time to show you all the ins and outs, but I want to show you what Flipgrid is. This is a screenshot from Flipgrid, and instead of a discussion board that has text, Flipgrid is a discussion board where you share videos. So instead of you typing out your answer, you might share your answer in a video that you took of yourself. So for instance, this one says, what did you learn in today's breakout session? And you can see all the students here have taken a video, and they can be short, they can be long. And this is another way for your students to engage. Certain groups of students may like this better than others. I could very easily see this as a great way for some speaking and listening standards to be covered, especially on the ESL side, where students maybe don't have to type and worry about their typing or their spelling, but more so just speaking the words out loud. Now, this is a very basic Flipgrid, right? The teacher has posted, what did you learn about breakout sessions? They've got 72 responses within this course. Let me show you a more advanced Flipgrid. A more advanced Flipgrid section here. So this is a calculus course, but I could easily see those of you who are real ambitious to start with Flipgrid eventually working up to this. What this teacher did was pick, the overall goal is to pick up a solution from where the last person's Flipgrid left off and do the next step. So this is a creative way to use something like this, where a student is filming themselves kind of doing the next step of a problem. And you can see here in the middle, like 3A, B, C, and D. And these are all continuations of the same problem. So it's kind of like a pick up and drop off, right? I've done the first step, now you do the next one. So you can see how creative and engaged you and your students can be just by using a tool like this. So this is called Flipgrid. And the other resource we shared with you was Padlet. And what I'll say about Padlet is that instead of just videos or just text, Padlet allows for you to do a variety of entries. So you could do a video, you could insert a picture, you could insert a document, you could comment or do some sort of multimedia presentation. So Padlet is a little more versatile. So maybe you have some students that communicate in different ways. That might be a better tool for you. Or maybe you have some students that are super engaged and love this idea of video, or maybe you try it and it falls flat for one class, but it works really well for another. So student engagement, it's here, right? And actually,
Hey
go
Amber.
ahead, Anita,
Hey
go ahead.
Amber, I'm gonna jump in real quick. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I'm thinking back to the poll that happened at the very beginning, when all of you out there, like 80% of you, said that student engagement was what brought you here. What's going to happen is if we try to fit everything that we have packed into this webinar for you today, we're going to have to rush this section. And I don't think Amber and I want to rush this section because you guys have said this is what you want. And so what I think I'm going to recommend, Sarah and I have been chatting, is that we're going to split this webinar in half. And we're going to save kind of the second half of our agenda for another day. And we're going to spend the rest of our time here together working with our guest speaker and concentrating on this engagement section. So how does that sound to you, Amber? That okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. You know, guys,
Great.
we initially went with this idea of an LMS, and then there's so many good things we wanted to share with you. I think at some point we even said to each other, should this be 2 sessions? And you know, sometimes you never know what's going to happen, right? You're in the middle of it, and we really want what you guys said at the beginning, the student engagement. If that's what you want, we want to spend time on it. We don't want to rush it and make you feel like you've been hit over the head with student engagement tools. We want to, you know, slow down a bit. So we're over halfway
Absolutely.
through. Let's keep going, right?
Perfect. If you don't mind throwing the screen to me, I'll take over, and then I will have our guest speaker here jump in just a few seconds.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds
you
good.
so much, Amber. I appreciate it. So I was chatting with Sarah Goldammer in the background here. We were talking about how, you know what we're doing? We're learning on the fly, people. That's what this is. And so I just love that, because this is how we do, right? In class, we figure things out on the go. So that's what we're doing for you today. So I want to talk about student engagement with you. And just as several of the tools that Amber already showed you are super engaging, right? So Padlet and Flipgrid and all of that. We also want to look at a couple of other ideas that will help you increase engagement and interest. And so I'm actually going to jump ahead, because I want to invite our guest speaker to jump in, because she is here to talk specifically about how she engages students. Our guest is Jill McAllister from the College of DuPage, and she's going to share with us some ideas for how she uses Screencast-O-Matic and Edpuzzle in her classroom. So Jill, if you don't mind sharing with us, we would love to hear from you.
Yes, hello everyone. So again, my name is Jill McAllister. I teach at College of DuPage. And this semester, I taught a 16-week class. So we were almost 8 weeks into the semester before this started, and we were doing pretty well. And then this happened, and you know, I think I could break my class up into probably 3 groups. I had one group that was just like, we're gonna do it. We're gonna, whatever you say, let's go. I had one group that was like, whatever you say, I'm not doing. So I don't have the internet. I don't have the motivation. I can't do it unless you're standing over me, all of which I understand. And then I had this middle group, and this middle group could have gone either way. Maybe they had a different job change. Maybe, you know, their kids are at home during the morning, so they didn't have a computer that they could be in a Zoom class with me, or so I kind of tried to get creative and tried to figure out a way to keep that middle group that I could keep, but if I didn't catch them, they were going to turn. So what I did was 2 things. I took my class and I just made it open. Instead of it just being Mondays and Wednesday mornings, I recorded all of my lessons using Screencast-O-Matic. And I put it on Blackboard, and then I also put it in Google Classroom, so they had 2 different means to get to my class. And you know, we had workbooks, and I told them, you know, do the workbook, and then we're going to, I will go over it, and then you just need to send your pages to me, like via Remind, via email, via text, however you want to send them to me. And I told them specifically I was going to look at how they annotated all the readings. So if they annotated it much like I annotated it, I could tell that they were watching the videos. You know, it's not my ideal. When the whole Zoom, you know, when everyone turned to Zoom, the first thing I didn't want to just jump in, because there's a lot of privacy issues with Zoom. And so I didn't want to make sure, I come from public school teaching, and I taught at a disability services center. So therefore, I just wanted to make sure I was not going to be like infringing on anyone's privacy rights before I put everybody's video on in front of me. Now that all of that kind of has been looked at, I think Zoom's a little bit more safe, or Blackboard Ultra, or whatever you're going to use. But initially, I was a little bit hesitant. But I also didn't want to lose people. So with Screencast-O-Matic, I could record the lesson and they could still see me. It records my screen, it records me, and I constantly email. I constantly sent messages letting them know, hey, I see what you're doing. I see that you're on. I see you're checking Blackboard. And it was constant. And, if they sent me something at 1:30 in the morning, they got a response at 1:30 in the morning, because this is just how I had to keep them. But then I also used something called Edpuzzle in addition to Cast-O-Matic. My husband is a high school teacher, and he started, when he started doing his lessons, I kind of turned to him and I was like, what is your district saying you can do? Like, what are the approved things? And he gave me a long list, to which was very overwhelming to me. I mean, he sent me emails of links and this. So finally I said to him, can you tell me the students in your class that are maybe having the most trouble getting motivated? Like, what are they doing? And he's like, oh, they'll do Edpuzzles. That they will do. So Edpuzzle is basically a slide presentation, and as the slide presentation goes, you can insert questions. So you can take, and you can do this one of two ways. You can either use pre-recorded lessons like TED Talks, YouTube videos that are safe, any of that, and you can then insert your own questions into it. And then it'll grade your questions for you if they're multiple choice, or you can go back and click on like short answer questions and check that way. The other thing you can do, which is what I did, is take lessons from your class. And I made screen presentations. I made PowerPoints with all of them. And then I inserted the questions that would have been at the end of that lesson into the Edpuzzle. And that way, our students that don't want to print stuff out or can't print stuff out, or it's just a lot to read the article and then to answer the questions and then send the answers to me, I felt like I could kind of streamline that for them. And that way, they watch this video, they answer questions as they're watching it. It's timed, so I can then tell, okay, are you spending 15 minutes on it? Are you spending 30 minutes of it? And then I can give them credit for that amount of time as they're doing it. Additionally, for my Edpuzzles, I could also go to like a GED prep book and take some multiple choice questions from the prep book and put them in my Edpuzzle also. So they're getting, I teach in an ABE class, they're getting some GED prep also. And then it takes away, if they're tired of doing a workbook, if they're tired of, writing, if they just want something different, if the way they learn and the best way that they can learn is by something visual, then this is awesome for them. And it kept them engaged, and it kept those couple people that were trying to get this done while they work their jobs on their lunch break. It kept them engaged in my class.
Thank you. Jill,
yeah.
This is wonderful. I so appreciate your willingness to share with us. And particularly, I loved how you were describing that your students kind of fall into different categories. Did you find that middle category of student that you were hoping to reach, that some of them responded to some of your activities like this?
I did. I specifically was concerned about one student who had been working at Sam's Club, and she was just, you can imagine in the beginning of this, she was just overwhelmed. And she said, I just don't have time to sit and do the workbook. So I was like, and she's the one that did all of these. And I said, let me, try this and, do these questions so you get the curriculum. And she ended up finishing. She's going to the GED class next semester. And I had probably 3 or 4 that I was really concerned about, but they would at least do this. So it did help.
Great. I'm so glad. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your experience. I hope that it inspires others out there who are listening to do kind of what you did, which is kind of step back and analyze what the need is in your group, and then use those tools to meet those needs. So we really appreciate you being with us.
Oh, sure.
So we're going to jump back to some student engagement tips here, and we're just going to focus on a couple of strategies that you can use in addition to what you heard from Jill. One of them that we want to talk about as a quick tip is to encourage your students to research content and careers and fields of interest that they have for their possible future work or study. This is an andragogical principle that we should be using in our face-to-face classrooms anyway, right? We should be contextualizing the basic skills with college and career and workplace readiness. So let students choose an area of interest and get them researching their career or their field. This is a wonderful opportunity for independent work that still has a lot of relevance to students. So we didn't want you to forget that content piece while we're talking about tools. This is a huge contextualization piece that we want you to remember that works well with that independent work in an online class. There are two interactive apps that you might want to use in conjunction with your LMS, and they are Pear Deck and Mentimeter. And again, you'll have this slideshow posted on the Excellence site, so you can access these and remember them later. Pear Deck in particular is a Google Slides add-on that can be put in, and it's a live slides presentation tool that allows students to see the slides on their own devices that match what you're teaching from. These interactive slides you can also put in to solicit feedback, do a quick formative check, see how your students are feeling. So it's interactive in that way. Mentimeter, you may have heard, that's an interactive presentation software that lets you interact with an audience or a student group through real-time voting. So you could gather data or responses from students and then aggregate the results, and students can see those results in real time on their device. So these apps can offer a lot of engagement and interaction over and above what you have going on in your LMS. This is just an example of a slide that you might include in your Pear Deck. And as you can see, the students are being prompted down there at the bottom to write in their response. And then they would do so on their device, and then those would be gathered live, those results. We also just want to point out real quick that when you're using Pear Deck, there are lots of options for how you can take student responses. Either by text, they can draw, there are number responses, etc. So there's a lot of different options there for Pear Deck. And two, Amber had pointed out this really nice option here between a student-paced activity and an instructor-paced activity that we just wanted to show you real quickly. Even when students are working through lessons at their own pace, asynchronously, right, independently on their own time, you can create a student-paced activity for them. Or you can be working live in a synchronous meeting with your team on web-based, and your students are all with you, and you can use that mode to guide them through the lesson in real time. So there's a lot of options there with Pear Deck.
Just
another
second,
option
Anita.
for student. Yeah. Oh, please.
Sorry.
You want me to go back?
No. Well, yeah. If you don't mind, just I wanted to make sure because we just forgot, because this is always the question. Pear Deck there's a free version of Pear Deck, and there is a free version of Mentimeter. So you can kind of play with them and see. I find the free version of Pear Deck to be just fine for me. It has those options without the stars, so I can still have students entering text, choosing something, writing a number, or even going to a website from my slideshow. So whether it's synchronous or it's doing it self-paced, they can still enter in their responses to your questions. And this is really good for formative assessment, right? You've presented something, now you want to do a quick learning check, and whether it's instructor-paced or student-paced, Pear Deck and Mentimeter, they're very similar programs. So they're very similar programs where you present some sort of slideshow, and then they can respond interactively with it. And then also, these are not, Mentimeter nor Pear Deck are an app. They simply need to have an internet connection, and they go to a very short URL, and then they log in with like a code. And then once they log in with that code, their They're right there. A Pear Deck is an add-on to Google Slides. Mentimeter is its own software. Oh, well, online software, okay? Edpuzzle, I also want to mention, Edpuzzle is free. So in most of the things that we try to present, there isn't a fee for unless you want to upgrade to another version. So we're just getting lots of questions about the logistics of that. So thanks, Anita, for letting me jump in there.
Absolutely. No, and I appreciate the fact too that you remind us that even though some of these things do have for, paid versions, what we're going to share almost always will be something that has free versions so that we can know that you need to be able to take advantage of them. And certainly we encourage you to go play around with these things. And there's almost always help and support out there. If you just Google, how do I use Pear Deck? You're going to find some sort of support page or video that will show you. So don't be discouraged too about thinking, how will I learn to use it? There's lots of support out there on the web to find help. Another way that you can get students to engage actively in your course is to get them to collaborate with each other in an online class. Now think about how easy it is for students to collaborate when you have them face-to-face and how often we do it, right? So if we, again, we're thinking about the principles of good, high-quality instruction in our classrooms, how do we translate that into an online environment? Collaboration between students. We've got to get them working together. And when you are online, that can be hard. So shared docs is a great way to get that principle into an online class. They could be working on a shared product like a writing assignment or a slide presentation. They could be manipulating data together in a Google Sheet or an Excel sheet. Both Microsoft 365 and Google Suite has options for collaborative work. We're not going to spend a bunch of time talking about these specific tools because partly you probably are familiar with them. You may just not have thought that you can assign your students to do work in them, and you can. The other thing I want to mention too is that Michael Matos has done an excellent webinar very recently that is archived on the Excellence in Adult Ed website we've been mentioning, and it's called Collaborating with Google Docs. There's a whole webinar just on that. So we would encourage you to go visit that. We'll show you at the end how to get to that website so that you can know how you want to interact and use those shared docs. And remember, sharing docs and collaborating does not have to be write an essay, right, and everybody comment on it. It can be lots of different things. Again, you can have groups working to create slideshows. You can have groups working with data in a sheet. There are all kinds of options for this. So again, think about what you would like to do in a face-to-face setting. Is it possible for you to replicate that in some way creatively through your LMS, through some of these other alternative tools that we're mentioning? So if you're curious about how you could have students collaborating together in a Google Doc, check out Michael Matos's webinar. It's a great way to consider having your students work. Now, Jill
Anita,
has talked with us.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just to address the last few tech questions here, because we've got just a couple people asking some specifics that I think will be really helpful. When we're talking, the things that we have talked about so far, Screencast-O-Matic, Flipgrid, Padlet, Mentimeter, Pear Deck, again, there's all a free version of those. Some of them, if you want more upgraded features, you can pay to have that. I can't speak to Screencast-O-Matic, but I am going to assume, because Jill used it and she has the same population we do, are all mobile friendly. So if students are, the only way they're accessing the content is through their phone, if they have an internet connection, which is the if, right? But if they have an internet connection and they use an internet browser, they can access a Pear Deck presentation or a Mentimeter presentation or a Edpuzzle or a, what was the other one? Oh, a Flipgrid. They don't have to download an app. It is a website. So all of this, when you're putting it into your LMS, for these resources, you don't have to teach students how to use, like how to download an app and log in, or it can be housed within your LMS as a website. Go to this specific web address and here will be a presentation. I want you to read it, follow along, and answer the questions in the presentation. And so that's partly why we picked these very specific engagement tools, so that they could be integrated into your LMS without having to have students necessarily access a whole separate login page, right? Because we want to try and make navigation seamless. So there were lots of questions in about apps and requirements on computers and things like that. I would say that I have used Mentimeter and Pear Deck with my students, as well as Padlet, and my students have been able to access it on their phone as well as their Chromebook or their computers without a problem. They aren't heavy platforms or robust platforms that need a download. It can all be done through an internet connection. So sorry, Anita, thank you.
Great. No, you're fine. So, so I think, do I have the poll showing out there? Fabulous. All right, so there's a poll here asking, which of these student engagement tools that you saw today do you think you'd be most willing to give a try? What are you the most interested in using? Go ahead and put your vote up there. And as you're thinking through that, remember, we'll just remind you that there are lots of ways that you can find support for using those tools. Just by Googling how to use, blank, you'll find it. And I'm also going to give you one other suggestion too about ways to find help with some of these tools here in just 1 second. So I'll give you just about 5 more seconds to vote here, and then we'll close this down. I appreciate all of your interest here in these tools. That's exciting. Great. Okay.
Anita,
so I'll share the poll there.
Oh, go ahead.
I did. Does it show up?
Yeah, a couple people said they weren't able to click, which was just kind of odd.
Yeah, we had that earlier too when you launched yours. We had a couple people say they couldn't do it, so not
I'm
sure
sorry
what that's
that you
about.
didn't get to vote. You could throw it in the question if you really need your voice heard. Absolutely.
That's right. Looks like many of you are interested in Edpuzzle, what Jill shared with you, which is great. And, if you have questions and you'd like to talk to Jill, let me know. I'll see if she's willing to give you some suggestions. Also, remember, Google, how do I use Edpuzzle? You'll find a lot of good info. Pear Deck, shared docs. Looks like a lot of you are willing to try a bunch of these, which is wonderful. Appreciate that very, very much. Great. Okay. So I want to get to just kind of the very end of our presentation here as we wrap up, which is to remind you of a couple of very important things. One is the excellenceinadulted.com site, which is basically the PD Network's portal. This is where everything you need to know about PD and teacher training. So a couple of things on here. When you go to the home page, you'll see a distance learning resources link right on the front page. You click that, it takes you here. There are the archived webinars that we mentioned earlier, where Michael Matos's webinar on the Collaborate with Google Docs is there, and there's a bunch of other ones. Ours from today will be there along with our slideshow. There are a handful of resource lists there. And then I want to point out those adult ed discussion boards. This is a resource that we've started recently. And if you have interest today, let's say you heard about something and you're really interested and you go online and you learn a little bit about that new thing and you think, oh, I still need help. You can go onto the discussion board and ask some questions there and get answers and suggestions from co-teachers and other people in the state. Or you can request a mentor. This is something that we have been doing that's new in the state for PD Network here, and that is that we have teachers who are experienced in using particular tools, platforms, teaching strategies for online that you can request a mentor in. So let's say that you've got an area, a content area, a technology platform that you really wish you could have some specific coaching and help with. You can send an email to this address, tell us your name, give us your email, where do you work, where do you teach, and say, this is what I need help with. And Sarah Goldammer, our wonderful partner in the PD Network, is collaborating and working to bring those mentors and mentees together. So we encourage you to take advantage of all of the resources that are available on this portal, as well as the mentor option that's available here as well. And just some last minute housekeeping. You will get a PD certificate for 1 hour of PD. It will come to the email that you used to register for the webinar. give us a week. If you don't see it, there is an email there that you can email to say, hey, I didn't get my certificate, but do remember to check your spam folder, please. It might have landed in there. And as we mentioned earlier, when Amber had told us about that recording is going to be posted, there it is, right where we showed you that webinar link. That's where you'll find this within the next couple days. And we'll also be scheduling the second half of this webinar, LMS best practices. In the next couple days, we'll get some news out there so that you can jump in for the second half with us, where we can load you up with a lot more information about how to use your learning management system effectively. So as always, let me just say that we always appreciate your time, your attention. We appreciate your devotion to your students, and anything that we can do to be of support, please let us know. You can send it to that Gmail account right there on your screen. And everybody at the PD Network says hello and have a good week. And thanks for joining us today.